I've brought you to the stunning Derwent Reservoir in County Durham. Now this place is proper north. Big, massive, wild, deep venue, and I'm going to show you a few tips and tricks to catch some big roach on a feeder. So where do you start fishing on a big, massive venue like this? It can be quite daunting, but when you're targeting roach, it's all about the depth of water that you're fishing in. And I've done a bit of research and I've spoke to a few local anglers, and they've been catching lots of big roach in around an 8-second count on an 1.5 ounce bomb. And that is so important to get that depth of water right. And what I like to do is I have a chuck out with an 1.5 ounce bomb. I've got a stopwatch. I click it as soon as that bomb hits the surface of the water. And when the bomb hits the bottom, I stop my stopwatch, and that gives me a true reflection of how deep I am fishing in. So I'm going to take the locals' advice, starting that 8-second count of water, which in my experience is around 25 to 28 foot of water, which seems really deep, but it's a massive venue. And if that's where the locals are catching, that's where I'm going to start. But I won't be afraid of chasing them fish out to even deeper water. Say, add an extra 10 metres onto my cast, and that might be a great way of finding them fish, because they could be absolutely anywhere. The beauty of today's session is I'm fishing one line, so I've brought one rod with me. Super simple. It's a 12-foot Aventus distance feeder rod with an 1.5 ounce tip in it. I like that 1.5 ounce tip when I'm fishing for roach, as I think you see those tiny little plucks and indications. And that 12-foot rod is going to be perfect for getting that 50-metre mark nice and comfortably. The reel is a cast system loaded with 010 pulsate braid, and that's running direct straight through to the feeder. Braid direct is so important when you're targeting roach, in my opinion. I'm fishing quite far out for roach today, longer than I would usually be fishing for them. So I want to see every little pluck and indication. I think that's going to be so important for catching fish and getting more bites. That's running down to a small feeder link to a 5-inch boom of 8-pound shield, and to tie that to my braid, I've simply tied a 4-turn water knot direct to that braid. It's nice and neat. The feeder link buffs up to that knot, and trust me, I've never had any problems with crack-offs or tangles, fishing at distances up to 80-90 metres even. Hook choice is something I wanted to run through in a little separate section. This is so important when you're targeting roach, in my opinion. There's only 2 patterns I like to use, and that's match special hooks and pole special. So when do I use each? The pole special is a great hook in a 16 and a 14 when you're fishing for smaller roach, or the fishing's a little bit difficult, so where you have to fish with single baits. But the match special is my go-to hook when I'm looking to catch lots of fish. Got a nice big wide gate, which is really good for hooking fish and not losing them, and it's got a super sharp, durable point of the hook, which means that you can catch lots of fish on the same hook, and it stays incredibly sharp throughout the whole session. Line choice for my hook length is 018 pure fluorocarbon, and you might be thinking that's quite a thick material to use on a natural venue when you're only targeting roach, but the main reason I like to use a thicker hook length line is because it doesn't tangle. And the reason why I like fluorocarbon is because I think it's a little bit stiffer than mono, and the fish don't see it as much in these clear conditions. And I'm starting on a metre long hook length today, which might seem mega long, but I like it because I think you catch a lot of fish as your hook bait is falling through the water, especially them big crafty roach. Roach can be very finicky feeders, and it can be a nightmare at times missing bites. So that's when I'd look to reduce my hook length down to 50 centimetres. I keep it nice and simple. I have start on the metre hook length, drop it to 50, and that can be a great way of turning those missed bites into fish in your net. Feeder choice for roach is really straightforward in my opinion. I like to use cage feeders and window feeders. The cage feeder is a great feeder to start your session on because it draws fish into your peg and gets them down to the bottom where you're intending to catch them. The cage feeder obviously has holes in the side of the feeder, which means that ground bait is released as the feeder is falling. So when the roach are off the bottom, they follow it down to where your hook bait is and your loose feed. When I've got lots of fish feeding confidently in my swim, I'll always look to use a winder feeder because it's great to concentrate fish down on the bottom. A winder feeder doesn't release any bait until your feeder is actually on the bottom and you reel in. So when you reel in, your loose feed and your ground bait is released from the window, teeing up that next cast. So the fish only have one option, to eat your hook bait, and it can be a great way of catching lots of fish very quickly. One aspect that's overlooked quite a lot in feeder fishing is how hard you actually pack your feeder. Early on in the session, I'll only look to lightly pack my feeder with a ground bait on the venue like this. So I think it's great for drawing fish into your peg because it releases very quickly. But if I'm looking to pin those fish down to the bottom, I'll give it a good firm squeeze, which ensures that my ground bait and loose feed gets to the bottom where I want to be catching them. When it comes to ground bait choice for roach on natural venues like this, I like to use a non-fish meal based mix. The fish don't see a lot of pellets in these sort of venues, so that's where a cereal based mix really comes into its own. I'm using the Mainline Match Proactive ground bait today. That's really bready and hempy, and the fish absolutely love it. And today I've not mixed it very wet, to be honest. I like to mix all my ground baits when I'm targeting venues like this quite dry to start with, and then I can tinker about with it when I'm on my peg. Certain days a wetter, heavier mix is really good, but on other days a really dry, fluffy ground bait that empties quite quickly throughout the columns of the water can be great for roach. All I like to do to change that sort of consistency as the session goes on is pick up my atomizer, give it a quick wet, and that can be a great way of just changing that consistency, but keeping it dry to start with gives you a lot of freedom and versatility when you're on your peg. So what do I put into my feeder along with that ground bait? I like to keep this really simple for roach fishing. I use maggots, pinkies, casters and hemp. And I use a bit of a combo of each and see how the day goes. If the fishing is really, really good, I'll put more particles in to get those fish feeding nice and confidently. But if it's quite a tricky day, I'll cut back on that loose feed and feed mainly ground bait. My favourite hook bait for roach on a feeder is always floating maggots. These sink a lot slower than usual maggots, and it gives the roach a little bit more time and opportunity to see your hook bait and grab it. Preparing these floating maggots is really simple. All I like to do is grab a handful of maggots and put them into a pint bait box, and then lightly cover them with a little bit of lemonade, which makes the maggots float. So then I like to add a lid to the top of the bait box, which will actually cut the top part of the section out, and that just stops the maggots escaping. One great little trick to try, if you're missing a lot of bites, is to hook a single maggot through the side. This means your whole hook point is on show, and it's a great way of pricking those fish. Something that will help you hit a lot more bites when you're fishing for roach on a feeder is to actually hold your rod, because you're in direct contact to everything. Your hook bait, your feeder and your tip. So as soon as you get a little indication that you know that fish is on, you're straight into it. And another thing that'll help is to use a long front reaper rest. That gives you total control of your tip tension, which in my opinion is so important. I like to have a slight tension just so I know I'm in contact to my feeder, but I don't like a tight tip when I'm fishing for roach because I think the fish feel the tension in that tip and spit out your hook bait. So I'm just like a slight bend in my tip, and that means the fish will pick up my hook bait, not feel that tension, and all of a sudden I'm into a fish.